Hey, friends. This is a wing and a prayer from yours truly at Bacala Laguna in our studio in Mexico. I just arrived here last night, having traversed 3 continents in the last 72 hours. So slightly disorientated. I have to make a confession here. Starlink went down yesterday, big rains today, and our 2 other networks in the office here are being very, very ropey. So I'm actually on a hot link to my UK mobile, which will probably cost me about $3,000 this show. That's how much I love you. But look, I'm super stoked to have Rick Levine with us in the studio today. I'm going to bring him in a couple of minutes. I just want to share a couple of photographs. See if I can do this. Present, share screen, window. Tell me if you guys can see this. Okay. I just want to share this with you. This was last week in Bali, friends. This was the beautiful ceremony that we did with Chief Phil Lane Jr., who flew in, spent about 8-9 days with me. The high priests in Bali, the great Ida Resi Wisasanta and the Ida Resi Mahadevi came in. They are the supreme high priests, male and female, came in and presided over the most extraordinary ceremony, 5-hour ceremony. We had a film crew there. We filmed it. We had hereditary leaders. We had royalty. We had an incredible audience of new earthers from all parts of the world. Mongolian throat singing and the most incredible musicians. What we were doing in simple terms was anchoring the East and the West, the North and the South, but principally East and West, the Americas and Asia, and conducting a very sacred ceremony to create the bridging of the worlds at this epochal time. And this is the landing of prophecies. This is eagle and condor, hummingbird, quetzal, Hopi, biblical, Nostradamus, all the prophecies you can shake a stick at, coming to roost 2025. Now, that's my take on where we're at. These are just some photographs at my villa there at New Earth Haven. There's the high priest Wisasanta and high priestess Mahadevi. That's Chief Phil Lane Jr. kneeling in front of them. And Steven Seagal, my friend, the Hollywood actor, flew in. He's a 7th Dan Aikido master, 9th Dan karate master, and a ceremonialist. And a remarkable guy, I have to say, completely vilified by Hollywood, targeted by them and by the woke, liberal, intellectual motherfuckers who've been running the mainstream media machine, principally on the West Coast. And there's a reason for that, which will all come out. There's a reason why Vladimir Putin appointed Steven Seagal as his private envoy. And he was there in Indonesia, spending a week with the president in Jakarta, and flew in to spend a few days with me and Chief Phil. But a very, very interesting week and a very beautiful one. Again, we had a film crew, and that film will be coming out duly. I will remove this now and get back in the studio. Again, this is connected to, in my view, the year 2025. Why I deem it to be a seminal and axiomatic year in the upshift or the early onset ascension event, however we want to coin this. It's clearly happening. It's palpable. It is destruction, anti-destruction. It is the falling away of the skin, the mask, the apocalypse, the Armageddon. It is the early onset to the genesis or regenesis of the angelic human. That's my language. I stand by that. I'm witnessing it all around the world. 3 weeks ago, I was in Central Africa with the parliament of the King of Kings there, the Litunga. Prior to that, with the King of Kings and many of the paramount hereditary leaders in Southern Africa. For the last 4 months, I've met with scores and scores of the world's top gun hereditary leaders who are on the verge of standing up and reclaiming the soil, reclaiming the title, reclaiming the jurisdiction. Sons and daughters of God, all of us, reclaiming this world, the living soil, from the false light, from the Luciferian false light matrix, from the parent corporation, from the corporations masquerading as governments, all of the above. So when I talk about a seismic shift in 2025, I'm keen to see where, if, and how the greatest living astrologist that I'm aware of, and I'm aware of a great deal in this world, the man, for me, who has always proven the straightest arrow, the greatest wisdom flame in all things astro, ... I give you, friends, the great Rick Levine. Hey, brother. Happy to see you.
Well, after that introduction, I think I should just remain silent and look intelligent.
Well, do that for one moment whilst I just finish my preamble. Today, friends, we're looking beyond the veil of time and consciousness in an exploration of the cosmic forces shaping our era, led by none other than Rick Levine. This discussion today is looking into the convergence of ancient wisdom and modern paradigms, unraveling how the celestial dance of 2025, friends, Anno Domini, in the false light calendar, represents an unprecedented turning point. We're going to investigate the mysteries of planetary cycles, the liminal edge between the age of Pisces and Aquarius, for those of you who know, and the intersections of astrology, technology, and most importantly, evolving consciousness of us hominids scrambling around on the surface of this plane of existence. Rick, 2025, how's it kicked off as far as you're concerned?
Right on schedule. It's, I should begin by saying that as an astrologer, I'm a bit of a minimalist. Every month, astrologers all around the planet run around saying, this is the most incredible month ever. The new moon that's happening has never happened before. I mean, it's always like aimed at this moment. The apocalypse is always tomorrow. Well, 2025, and I have to really be honest, it's really 2024 through 2028. But
Right.
2025 is an absolute turning point, and it has a bit of astrological history tied to it, but it also, and this is going to sound crazy, has no history tied to it, because the changes that we're seeing occurring right now have never really occurred, A, either astrologically, or B, astrologically in a world that's technologically different, and that changes astrology than ever before. Because historically, when an event happened, even something as simple as an eclipse or even as a full moon, people under that visual would see it and talk about it. They would feel it, but they wouldn't necessarily know that anyone was feeling it down the block, around the corner, in the next country, or on the other side of the planet. And on top of that, cycles always build on previous cycles. And the ancients, every moment was like disconnected from the past. But because of technology, we now live in what I'm calling a global feedback loop. Just like a rock show would have this incredible audio feedback, that every time the ripple is disturbed or excited astrologically, it brings out all of the cell phone captures of everything that happened 2 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 years ago, or whatever, that then bring up that energy even more and more. And because of the instantaneity of our exonervous system, what we like to call the World Wide Web or the internet, but make no mistake about it, it is an exonervous system. Because of that, we get instantaneous resonance all around the planet. And so these big changes that have never happened have also never happened in an environment that can turn consciousness on a dime in a moment. And that's why 2025 is so extraordinary. There's a series of events astrologically. I'll mention a few of them. I don't want to go technical on you. And so I'm going to keep it as straightforward and as simple as possible. But the sequence of events that are occurring in 2025 and how they're tied intimately to the events last summer, certainly around Election Day in the United States, how they're tied back to the events of the very significant conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, which occurred incidentally while I was with you in Bali back in January of 2020. And that significant event happened within hours of the media release of the note the air quotes, the Wuhan virus, and the announcement of that genome, which, as we know, was a catalyst for events that occurred over the whole following year. But these events do not occur in a vacuum either. They tie back to the events of 1989 to 93, 94, when we saw the global shifts in the Berlin Wall and Glasnost and Perestroika and all of these large, reshufflings internationally. And those events tie back to the mid 60s. You can see how these are like punctuation points in a paragraph that really is redefining who we are, what our origins are. I've been using four buzzwords, or what do you call them? Anagrams. Is that what? No, when you have letters that stand for something.
Acronym.
Thank you. I always get anagram, and acronym, and anachronism, anachronism. Anyhow, the letters are this: AI, AR, ET, and EIEIO. I'll explain very briefly. AI needs no explanation other than the real issue here is not artificial intelligence. It's really ASI, artificial superintelligence, which is the next step up on this. And that's something that doesn't need any further comment. The AR is augmented reality, which is very different than artificial intelligence. And these are biological either implantations or interfaces between consciousness that will allow us to augment our perception of reality and either tie it to a larger exonervous system or simply allow us to hear more, see wider spectrums, whatever. The third also needs very little explanation here, and that's ET. And then the fourth, EIEIO, is simply the reminder that we can't escape. We all live on old McDonald's farm, and there are chickens and gooses and ducks and donkeys and all these different things that somehow need to all survive on this farm, even though the farm is a singularity. The species on old McDonald's farm are very disparate. So that's my opening volley.
Beautiful. And just riffing a little bit on this kind of nexus point of the way I speak of the way I view it is the fallen light of Atlantis, this kind of end of this old arcane Babylonian blah blah into the light, leaving the galactic sleep, moving into the galactic day, so to speak. Clearly, that kind of huge motion is underway, presumably deftly reflected by the movement of the spheres. But in particular, can you just riff on the AI transhumanism bit, the Ahriman bit, this kind of weird flux that threatens to subsume us as we're blinking into this light of revelation, threatens to subsume us back into a Luciferian matrix of complete kind of false light with AI transhumanism, but synthetic biology, blah, blah, blah. Is that written in the spheres?
Well, yes. And I do not think, though, that the results are. In other words, the universe or the cosmos, our cosmos, is plastic. And I don't mean artificial, I mean malleable. And that's why it's so important that people now be involved in whatever way they choose to be, because what I'm seeing right now is that we are in the last stages of two metals curing into an alloy. And, copper, as we know, is malleable. Tin, although brittle, is malleable. When the two are melted together and they cure, they become bronze, which is no longer malleable. And I think that right now, humanity is at that point. It's a tipping point of sorts. And although you and I may disagree on a few different points here, that's not important, because I'm not convinced there will be a single moment. I believe there are going to be more and more larger and larger moments. And I think that it may take a while for us to be able to look back and see which single moment was actually the single point, the tipping point, actually, because while you're in the midst of change, it feels like process, even though there are epiphanies and very strong points along the way. I think that the time perspective that we're looking at here, Sasha, is so great that in 300, 500, 1,000 years, we'll look back, or something will look back and say, whatever happened in the late 20th to the early mid 21st century, that was the tipping point where everything changed.
Yeah. Just, Terence McKenna, I don't know if you ever knew, did you ever
Oh,
meet
yeah.
Terence
I
McKenna?
had a couple of very lovely and crazy and strange Terence McKenna like moments with Terence. I didn't know him well personally. I had friends of friends, but yeah, of
Right.
course I know Terence, or know
So,
of
so
Terence.
right, with Terence, for instance, he famously stumbled onto the time wave zero.
Time Wave Zero, him and his
Right.
brother Dennis. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got Bernard Mandelbrot, the arguably one of the, well, no, fuck that, definitely one of the greatest mathematical minds in the history of our world. And Bernard Mandelbrot, who my group, my foundation interfaced with before he died about 20 odd years ago. But Mandelbrot also stumbled onto the MSET mathematics, the Mandelbrot beetle, and that incredible equation Z equals Z squared plus C, which describes the movement of infinity on a screen, and became the basis of fractal
Yep.
hoo-ha, creating
Yep.
the screens and all. So when you've got memes that emerge almost out of left field into the genius of these incredible minds, incidentally, which I throw you in with that a lot. But the Terence McKennas of this world, the Bernard Mandelbrots of this world, who were seized, possessed in the indivisible line of genius, one fine day with some weird fucking Promethean thing that they wake up with, put it out there. McKenna put it out, time wave zero. It played forward. He was able to prove mathematically the most extraordinary stuff with that equation, as
You
was
can throw
Bernard
Ray
Mandelbrot.
Kurzweil into that mix also with this
Yes,
concept
yes.
of singularity.
Right. So my point being, as an astrologist, do you see things like the 2012 meme? Those things, are those also written hard and fast into the movement of the spheres?
I think that many of these points are written hard and fast into the movement of the spheres, but what's not written is how we act or react to these, whether we go into denial and go back to sleep. I think of Rumi's, it's morning, do not go back to sleep.
Right.
But sometimes that's what happens until these moments become so overwhelming that enough people band together and something changes, that then, of course, coming back to our technology, becomes a ripple that actually alters the direction. We see this astrologically in our individual lives all the time, where something happens that creates a ripple, but it's not until years later when we look back and go, wow, that was really a fantastically important moment, even though while we were going through it, it was a series of events that sucked.
Yeah. Right. Right. So do the celestial motions determine behavior and the fabric of reality, or does human behavior and imagining define and determine the movement of the celestial motion? Which
Yes.
came first?
Yeah, yeah, the chicken and the egg came together. Um, you know, what you're asking is a really significant and important question, and I would go all the way back to the apocryphal Emerald Tablet by created by the Hermes, the thrice great Hermes Trismegistus, the origin of the Greek Hermes, and then Mercury, the bringer of language and communication and knowledge. And in the Emerald Tablet, it said something that most people can recite the first few words of without understanding that more follows. And that is, as above, so below. Now, the problem with that is that it sounds like it's causal. It sounds like whatever happens upstairs then makes things happen downstairs, as above, so below. The fact is that that continues to go on, and it says the within of things is as the without of things. And it goes on to say that that's an illusion because all things are one. And here's the real tricky thing, and that is it turns out that there is no upstairs or downstairs, meaning that the weird quantum physics that we've discovered in the inside, in the microcosm, at the very, very high frequency, short wavelength of the vibrations of the universe, the subatomic realms, and the cosmological light year, astronomical planetary movement, etc., at these very external, larger than human life realities, the macrocosm and the microcosm are actually one, and we are surfing, consciousness is surfing an interference pattern between this mishmash of high frequency and low frequency vibrations, having this illusion that upstairs and downstairs, macro, micro, are separate, when in fact here on the middle cosm, the middle order, and the word cosm comes from a Greek word that means order and beauty. Here on this middle, on the mesocosm, we have the illusion of separateness, but one doesn't cause the other. They arise as a photon creates the wave that it's surfing on. Now, that's paradoxical, but of course, Niels Bohr, the founder of quantum physics, said that quantum physics is not stranger than you think, it's stranger than you can think, and so is the universe, as I know you know.
Beautiful. So so the human being, or the human temple, the biological temple in the temporal sense, is the threshold, event horizon between the macro and the micro, and that's the whole bloody point, isn't it? And then being able to situate consciousness in the still point, the indivisible state of witness, and thereby moving into coherence with the Atman, and being able to then dream an ever greater dream.
Yeah, I mean, poor Isaac Newton said we're just a drop in an infinitely large universe. And Rumi, several centuries earlier, said, no, we are so large that we contain the infinite universe.
I love it. Yeah.
It's all about perspective. And part of what astrology does, looking at perspective, it looks for, and this really goes back historically, I mean, the old Zoroastrian priests, and let's not forget that the word magi, think, the Christian Bible, the word magi is a Zoroastrian priest who basically looked to the heavens for finding meaning here on earth. Their temples, the ziggurats, were like little observatories. And so the thing about astrology is that it doesn't tell us where we're going. It just tells us when intersections in these large ripples are occurring. And the Magi understood that there was major ripples occurring, at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, at its great mutation point where it changes elements. Again, I don't want to go too technical, but but the Star of Bethlehem was an astrological event, regardless how it was framed. And we had a series of that kind of event with that same Jupiter-Saturn conjunction late 2020, separate from the event that kicked 2020 off. That really, it was very much a turning point in our awareness. But the things that are happening in 2025 are a confluence of several tributaries that are all coming together at the same time, that really begin with the story of Pluto changing signs. Astrologers look at when these slow-moving planets change signs. They look at when these slow-moving planets make angles or alignments with one another. And over the last year and a half or two, Pluto returned to the sign of Aquarius, where it was during the American Revolution, the formation of the US Constitution, the creation of the United States judiciary system, and the French Revolution. So Pluto, over the last year and a half or two, has moved back into Aquarius, where it will now remain for the next 2 decades. On top of that, the not quite as slow moving planets of Neptune, Uranus, and Saturn coming in one at a time are each changing signs around the same time. And they're all doing this beginning in 2025. And they're doing it where they're in harmonious relationship with one another based upon a division of a circle by 3 or 6, making either an equilateral triangle or a seal of Solomon, a 6-pointed Star of David, whatever you want to call it. But the key to this is not only Pluto changing signs and moving into the age of Aquarius, a bit as a harbinger of what has become known as the age of Aquarius, but that's likely not 100 years. That's likely still 100 years down the road. There's a lot of premature enlightenment going on right now, around this concept of the age of Aquarius. But Pluto moving into Aquarius, and we can come back to that in a moment because that has huge impact. But Pluto moving into Aquarius sets the stage. Into that stage comes a once every 40, 45 year alignment of Saturn and Neptune that we can clock backwards and look at the history of that. I don't want to do that right now, but we can look at all of these repeating cycles and see the history. However, there's a point in astrology, modern astrology, that is considered the 0 point of astrology. It is created every year mathematically by a relationship between the Earth and the Sun at the vernal equinox. That's in the northern hemisphere, and that point in space is defined as 0 Aries, which in astrology is the beginning of every cycle, occurs at 0 Aries, the first moment of spring. It used to be the new year until the Romans got a hold of the calendar and altered it, but the spring equinox was the beginning. So here's the thing, is that in this year, in 2025, we have several planets that are changing signs, including Neptune, which takes 165 years to go around. Neptune is actually moving into Aries, going over that 0 point on March 30th of this year. Now, that in itself is a significant piece, but Saturn is going over that exact same point in May, on May 24th, meaning that Saturn, the faster moving planet, is catching up to Neptune. Saturn, the planet of structure, authority, of the illusion of the three-dimensional reality, and Neptune, the imagination, Neptune, the dream world. And so when Saturn and Neptune come together, it's always important, but they've never done it within recorded history. Actually, I've personally gone back around 3,000 years, and Saturn and Pluto have never aligned at exactly 0 degrees of Aries. Now, that in itself would be crazy important, except it's doing that at a point that is harmonized with Pluto just having moved into Aquarius. And then on top of that, Uranus, an 84-year cycle, is moving into Gemini by July. And so these outer planets are all creating, in effect, 3 points on a 6-pointed star. There's more to this. There are more planets, but I don't want to take it any further. The point is that the world that we will be living in by 2028, okay, maybe we're getting inklings of it now, but the alloy of this copper and tin will be relatively solid by 2027, 28. But we're getting first waves of it in 2025 as all these outer planets are making angles with one another as they're shifting signs, and they're shifting signs from signs that are considered to be yin polarity, receptive, inward, to yang polarity, which is gender masculine, externalizing, and a bit more outwardly expressing. So that's the underlying piece. There's several other things, but that's why astrologers all around the world are saying 2025 is part of this much larger turning point, but it is certainly a nexus.
Brilliant. So those of us who are old enough to remember, look back at certainly the 70s with a sort of Afro spandex clad pop stars auguring the age of Aquarius. And here we are, we've hurtled into it. And the water bearer, the age of remedy, of healing, even what's happening in US Congress this week with Bobby Kennedy Jr. Being assailed by all of these grisly characters, apologists for the big pharma and agrochemical lobby groups that have clearly bought the US government, which is to say the world, over the last certainly 50, 75 odd years, and begun that systemic poisoning of the air, water, soil, and every living system. So that now seeking remedy, because that existential crisis really arrived at 2020 with the weaponization of the biosphere, the whole shit show that unfolded, which is now being revealed to the light of day, this kind of draconian conspiracy to systemically poison humanity. I don't know what you make of that piece, but to my mind, it's clearly bearing out. And right now, what we're seeing with the Kennedy Congress hoo-ha, Trump coming in, the great disruption taking place, it kind of is a major, I think, turning point toward planetary remedy, bioremediation, make America healthy again. I hate these strap lines, but it is an existential crisis. 68% of Americans apparently have major health crises, the sickest nation in the history of the recorded history. It's important shit. We are seeking remedy, even at the political level. Every human being is wanting to find harmony and peace. So speak, if you will, Rick, about the age of Aquarius in the archetypal sense, the water bearer, the water carrier, how this washes away our sins, the atonement, the redemption, the salvation. Yeah, hoo-ha. Talk about age of Aquarius.
Yeah. One thing before I go into that, which I have some probably very unique things, observations compared to many other astrologers about that. But I just want to say that part of the longer term thing here is that whatever we see as solutions, the world has become extreme bifurcated, and ultimately what's going to happen, and I hate to go back to this concept of Mahayana Buddhism, but we're either going to all get out of this together, or none of us are going to get out of it at all. And it turns out, or I believe it'll ultimately turn out, that Trump, as the great disruptor, I think that's a good term, is basically has been created as part of a larger scenario of the direction that not only the United States, but the entire capitalistic, patriarchally oriented, imperialistic, colonialistic, you have other words I know that you would use, but all of that's got to go at some point in time. And what's happening right now in the US government is not the answer, but it's a required break, because the reset, and again, your politics and my politics may vary, but I think our looking at this absolutely coincide, because something has to happen in order to, how do we say this gently, wake us the fuck up.
Right.
And that's happening, and a lot of people have been hurting for decades, and a lot of people will hurt for decades. And it's not, I don't want to sound callous here, because there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of difficult things going on in the planet, and any one person, Trump included, doesn't have the answers. In fact,
Yeah.
he may be just an arbitrarily placed thing at this moment in time, to, as I haven't heard a better term for him, as the great disruptor, but things needed to be disrupted. I just wanted to be clear about that this is not about being on this side or that side. It's basically about realizing that somehow there are two different perspectives that have developed in every single issue. I mean, again, the issue of biological sovereignty, which I know you are an absolute, evangelist when it comes to that, and yet we have then the issue of, does that mean only for men? Again, I'm not trying to stir anything up here. I'm just saying that politics does make strange bedfellows, and we need to get used to being in bed with people that don't agree with everything we agree with, because no matter what issues are important to you, you'll find people who have those same issues important to them, but then this other issue that's important to both of you is different. And that's the craziness of the world that we live in. And that's what's being reflected by the astrology of these times. And now we get to the age of Aquarius, because Aquarius, even though it's, the symbol is like two electrical waves, two, like zigzag lines, there is, in Aquarius, there is an apparent duality in the symbol. And yet the symbol of Aquarius represents the unification of culture, civilization, humanity, or electricity as a force, a concept. That electricity has both positive and negative, not judgmental, but it has two different flows that are opposite. And Aquarius, as the water bearer, it's not a water sign. Water in astrology has to do with feelings, emotions. It has to do with the left hand, right brain, the artistic visualization process of instantaneity. Whereas the air signs, like Aquarius has to do with sequential logical processing, the right hand, left brain. It has to do with the alphabet. It has to do with intellectualization. And the thing is that what most people don't realize is that Aquarius is the water bearer. And that is that if there wasn't water in the air, there would be no life. Just like when Pluto was last in Aquarius, Benjamin Franklin realized that lightning was electricity. There was electricity in the air. Galvani realized that a dead frog, if you stimulated it with electricity, its legs twitched, that our nervous system was electrical. If we don't have water in our nervous system, we do not have a nervous system. So Aquarius is the universal conceptualization of the bifurcated emotions. And here's where the problem is, because in astrology, most people look at the 2000 years upcoming of the, of the age of Aquarius as universal brotherhood. Everything will be, perfect. There'll be, that's great. But I'll give you an example of maybe the best example of that concept of universality in social systems is Borg from Star Trek. Because, or if you don't know Star Trek and you don't know Who Are You, we are Borg, and we shall assimilate you. Resistance is futile. If you don't know that Star Trek reference, just think of a termite colony, or an ant colony. And so the danger of Pluto in Aquarius in the age of Aquarius is this electrification of organic humanity as we know it into something that is quite alien because of its, whether you want to call it insectoid, whatever that word would be, or reptilian or non-human piece. That's part of what technology is doing right now. And the question becomes, how do we move forward, because evolution is unstoppable, and at the
Yeah.
same time hold on to whatever it was that made humans humans. And there's an analogy here that I got from Terence McKenna, and I would imagine that there were chimps on the plains of Africa doing mushrooms who had the same discussions. If we keep taking the shit, we're going to become something else. And I'm not
Very
saying
good.
that's a reason that we should or shouldn't. I'm just
Yeah.
saying the issue is way larger than we in our little worlds can understand, even when we're as open as some of us may be.
Indeed. And just to the audience, in a short while, a couple of hours, just what we're discussing here, transhumanism and synthetic futures, the whole kind of synthesizing of our sentience. Ilana Freeland is coming on to discuss this in some real length. What was it she called it? Synthetic biology, which is really the biggest existential threat in a sense, by virtue of the fact that we're being rained upon with all these nanobots and having these different interventions happening at the nano level. So just to go back again and pedal this a little bit more with the age of Aquarius, water is the quantum or the carrier of consciousness, the carrier of quantum consciousness. The latest researches appear to prove out, and certainly Professor Alex Ling, who I'm working very closely with. In fact, he was with me last night here at our HQ, because he's conducting some serious water research here at the Bacala Laguna. But the thinking is that the quasar that is the center of our whole hoo-ha of creation is water, is the source and the wellspring of water, and that water permeates the entire fabric of space, not just the watery planet upon which we thrive or attempt to thrive. So this dawning of the age of Aquarius, in a sense, is a return home, is it not? It's really us dialing back up into the metaspheres of our quantum capability, which is where we have to move out of the binary, dualistic, as you put it, the kind of patriarchal, pyramidal, bullshit Babylonian edifice that we've psycho-civilizationally, that we're now evolving from, moving into that great quantum. And you're so right. I think I read you correctly when you were almost cautioning us not to believe that the Trump phenomenon, this stuff, this disruption is not the thing. This is just a way sign. This is just a beautiful, timely bump in the road toward what? Well, let's determine that what.
Yeah, it's the
Ourselves.
last screamings of a, as you say, of a dying system that has been with us for at least the last 2,000 years.
Right, right, exactly right. And so, okay, the last primal scream as we move into this quantum void, and the last great threat we're facing is this AI transhumanist synthetic biology intervention. I think it's something which we're going to process and adapt to and through with relative ease, in much the same way that every other existential threat that we've faced. And I'll give you HIV/AIDS, because again, we were around in the 80s and that was the big thing. Well, that kind of disappeared. It all but disappeared because the human genome has this morphogenetic tendency, when it's facing an existential threat, to recalibrate and then rearrange the furniture so that threat is no longer a threat. And I was just having this conversation this morning with someone in my office here who came in very concerned about the Bacala Laguna, because there's some spillage and sewage and some runoff from the Mayan train going in and polluting much of this stunning laguna. And so there's a big panic going on at the moment amongst activists and academics. Oh my God, we're going to destroy this laguna. And I just reminded her, I said, yes, this is serious. We need to pay attention to it. But I remember 17 years ago when I was Director General in the United Nations IGO for renewable energy and remediation. And I remember the Gulf of Mexico oil spill. And this is to the point. The Gulf of Mexico oil spill was the biggest calamity imaginable. It was the biggest sensation front pages all around the world for weeks. This was going to destroy the Gulf of Mexico. The entire biosphere would take 500 years to recover. It was going to be a quadrillion-dollar cost. The world would... Right. 20 weeks later, all but 20 weeks later, Rick, we didn't even know it existed. It didn't happen. It just disappeared. And that's because nature, and this is to my point, has this morphogenetic capacity to be able to take whatever assault is coming at it and adapt. The entire genome will adapt and absorb that punch. It's almost like a taekwondo or aikido. So what do you say to that in connection to the age of Aquarius also being this great big this inertia that is set to absolve us of all of our psycho-civilizational traumas and crimes?
I'm not sure that I have an answer, and I'm not sure that if I did, I would have the answer that is socially acceptable. I think when you were referring to morphogenetic, and that was a correct use of the word, I would also use the word adaptogenetic at the same time, because the ability to, what you're describing is the consciousness of the field being able to adapt. Now, the problem with adapting is that, like, in epigenetics, we adapt to whatever's out there, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. We adapt. And the question is that age-old question, of when the velvet glove and when the iron fist. That's the tricky dance. When do you go along with the flow of the river, and when do you build a dam on that river to stop it for whatever reason that may be, whether it's to power a city with hydroelectric dams or to flood a field so that you can raise crops. And I think that this is really the question of where these resistances may most intelligently be placed as we are facing this move into more exo nervous system like interfacing consciousness with the external, into the use of computers. We all use our computers and don't think anything about it. But how alien is it to have this brain in a box on our desk or in our cell phone? And so we've already adapted beyond what someone from 100 years ago could possibly even imagine. And the question is, are we already post-human? Where does the trans and transhumanism become post-human? And will there be, as H.G. Wells imagined, two species on Earth, ultimately, one that chooses to remain carbon-based and one that ingests enough microplastics and nanomolecules of various sorts that the life form itself becomes, instead of carbon-based, long-term polymer-based that maybe can live 2 or 3 or 500 years. We don't know what the evolutionary process is. I know that, I am an early, adopter of most computer technology, and yet I don't use a microwave often. I know that if I was in, the pre-industrial revolutionary age, in England, would I have been a Luddite, burning machines or destroying them? It's been said by great media experts like Marshall McLuhan that machines are just a new phylum in the evolution of nature. Think of it as the phylum of machinists, and that human beings are like the honeybees of that phylum, kind of propagating it and keeping it going. The plastic island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, to me, is horrific. But does evolution have it, if nature really is intelligent, does it have it there as part of a plasticization? I keep using these words that I'm making up, but as part of a process of long-term evolution of dealing with archaic carbon molecules that are unstable and replacing them with these more stable molecules? I don't know. I know I'm a human, and the thought of all of those things, don't necessarily excite me. Neither does being Borg. And I think this is where we find places to make resistances to build dams and to say, no, we're not going in this direction. But it's a really tricky dance, and I don't know how it's going to play out.
Sasha's dropped off, so we're waiting. We're waiting to get him back. I could go to some questions that are coming up. If
perfect. Perfect.
This was one comment that I thought was kind of interesting if you wanted to riff off of that. The void rules an intention of thought and feeling creates, doesn't it?
Well, I think that intention certainly is a large piece of this. But I also think that intention itself needs to be part of a larger flow. I can intend to stay in one place, being a tree, and yet a glacier will argue with that and still move me, even if my intention is stabilized. Sasha's back, and the question, Sasha, was the relationship between void and then the intentions of thought that come from that. And I think intention is an important piece of this, but by itself, it has to be placed in a way that works with a pre-existent flow, which is why I think astrology can be so important, because it helps us understand these dynamic inflection points, like a taekwondo or an aikido, I think was the example you used, a great example.
Yeah.
A lot of astrology is based upon the old Western metaphor of boxing: block, parry,
Right.
and it's what a waste of energy, when every incoming wave becomes energy that you can move, let it ripple through the system, go out the other side, and you gain energy from it rather than losing energy. And I think that there it comes back to the idea of applying intention that is working with the incoming flow, rather than just saying, nope, hell no, I won't go. That one doesn't work.
Very good. Rick, you've said that astrology has suffered from a bad PR image, misunderstood as woo-woo. How can we reframe it for skeptics as a grounded system of interpreting the cosmos?
I think that's happening gradually, although I should say that as a an active voice in today's astrology, I share something that Johannes Kepler, some 400 years ago, was totally in agreement with me, or I with him, on, and that is he wrote a treatise called "The Third Man in the Middle," Tertium Inter Venus in Latin. And it basically was his case for astrology, but it's often quoted as why he thought astrology was absolute crap and bullshit. And what he thought was crap and bullshit was that in his day, astrology was largely used to know when to go to war and whether or not a duke or emperor was going to get laid or not. And largely in the popular realm, astrology is still used for those kinds of reasons. And I think that what will solve that, or what is helping that, is the idea of this internet communication system that's allowing more and more people to learn about things that you see. Astrology is the only thing that I know of that science and organized religion agree on, that it's a wart, a blot, it needs to be exorcised or excised off of the body of consciousness. And they have two very different reasons. The religious reason is who holds the power, the priest or the cosmos, that we can't have people having direct interface with, with God or the divine proportion. And with science, it's more a matter of control of immediate environments. It's this idea of repeatability, which I think ultimately is based upon a neurosis. I believe that science is actually a high level form of neurosis. You keep washing your hands and the same thing happens. It's
Very
built,
good.
David Hume's idea of repeatability is basically, science is going to keep repeating things until they realize that the most important things are not repeatable,
Right.
which is consciousness, which is why astrology can never be accepted as scientific, because every moment in the universe is a unique and different moment. And the way we resolve this is by talks like this. I mean, one of the things that I've spent a lot of my professional life doing is talking about how, with the advent of quantum physics, astrology no longer is an outsider, because there's everything that astrology is built on is basically validated and verified by the shocking loss of three-dimensional reality that happened for physics with the advent of the discovery of the craziness of what was happening in the microcosmic realms. And I believe that the microcosmic and macrocosmic realms, if one really says and believes as above, so below, then all of the crazy things at the microcosmic realms, the quantum physics, particle wave duality, the indeterminacy, the non-locality, everything in the universe is connected to everything in the universe. As the Hindus knew, they called it Indra's web. Science is built on this Newtonian illusion that if only things that are close together can have impact on one another. And there's a whole sequence of other quantum things, too much for right now. Yeah. But I think that astrology is repositioning itself. When I meet someone who says, I don't believe in astrology, I agree with them. I say, the astrology you don't believe in, I think is crap. I don't believe in it either.
Well, the great Christian skeptic Christopher Hitchens said not long before he died that, because he was pissed all over astrology and said, well, we were only, interested in astrology until we evolved into astronomy, and then we put away childish things. Well, I see it in a very different way. Curiously enough, and what he also said, and I think there is truth to this, was that the primary human behaviorism is predicated on the need to, heal from the trial of separation. And the way in which we choose to do that is by seeking patterns in everything, patterns in anything, which gives us what we believe to be a foothold. Now, there's someone here in the audience called Adria, who's saying, guys, you are aware that astrology is just another system created by evil to keep us prisoners, like symbolism and numerology, right? They are not from God and gotta go. Their disintegration will start in January 2026. Mark my words. Well, there you have it, Rick. Mark Adria's words. Astrology is just another system created by evil to keep us prisoners. Any coherent answer to that?
Well, yeah. It'll take me 2 or 3 hours to give you a fully coherent answer. But if that's true, then how come Jesus only invited 3 people outside of his family to his birth, and they were all astrologers? No, it's limited thinking based upon a propaganda that had to do. I mean, look, Thomas Aquinas was an astrologer until he realized that you couldn't have someone going to the astrologer at the edge of town and to the priest, that it was a political decision. There's nothing in Catholic canon that says astrology doesn't work. It just says don't do it. More importantly, the most important astrological tools that we modern astrologers have are named things like this: Regiomontanus. These are names of systems. Regiomontanus, Campanus, Porphyry, Campanus, Placidus. These are all monks from the 1200s to 1700s. These are the astrology was kept alive in the monasteries. And maybe even more importantly, for those illusionists who believe, like Hitchens, that astronomy has replaced astrology, he should read, or I know he can't now, but go back and read Johannes Kepler, who basically discovered the laws of planetary motion. When Isaac Newton said, I see so far because I stand on the shoulders of giants, he was referring to Descartes and Johannes Kepler in particular, others too, but those two in particular. And Johannes Kepler discovered the laws of planetary motion because he was the court astrologer to Emperor Rudolph. That was his day job. And he was driven by how the magic of the divine proportion just reinforced the glory of God. But he was a Protestant. In fact, he refused to get involved in the setting of the date of Easter. He goes, no, that's a religious thing. It's not scientific, because there was a big difference between the Protestant and the Roman, the Vatican at that time. But the point is that astrology is not going to go away just because some person who has bought the political institution of Christianity rather than the teachings of a maybe highly realized person, Jesus. I think Soren Kierkegaard nailed that, so that we don't have to go revisit that. And that is that there is a huge difference between Christianity and Christendom. Christianity is the teachings of this person, and Christendom is the political institution that arose from it. I love the bumper sticker that said, I don't fear the returning of Jesus. It's his followers that bother me or that worry me. So, no, I'm not concerned about that at all. And I think that the bottom line is that that one of the great problems from modern science's point of view is that when Johannes Kepler came up with the laws of planetary motion, the non-scientists at that time basically feared the idea that humanity has now reached into the divine proportion. We've all seen that woodcut, of the person reaching through the spheres, and that was like a representation of the human intellect going into this proportion that in Christianity was reserved only for priests who are initiates into being able to communicate with that divine, order based upon the fall, based upon original sin. I mean, this goes on and on and on, but it has nothing to do with reality. It's based upon a political institution that was built around control of someone's ideas.
Rick, there's another question here. Vedic or sidereal is alchemical astrology and is the only one true astrology. Your comments?
Okay, so Vedic and sidereal actually is a Latin word and it means stars. And Vedic refers to the ancient Vedic tradition. It really that differentiation could be sidereal or astrology based upon the stars is part of the Vedic tradition, but because of the Earth's wobble, the Earth wobbles backwards once every 26,000 years which means that about every 2,100 years, the line between the Earth and the sun at that first moment of spring has moved back an entire 30 degrees. The wobble is called the precession of the equinox, is 1 degree every 72 years. The saying that Vedic astrology or sidereal astrology, the astrology that maps the planets against the stars, is the only true astrology, sorry if I offend someone here, is just as stupid as saying that this religion is the only one religion and all other religions are wrong. It's just as stupid as saying what I think about everything in the universe is true and what you think about the universe is not. The difference between Vedic or sidereal or modern Western or tropical. Tropical is to sidereal. Tropical astrology is based instead of on the stars, it's based upon the Earth's relationship and its tilt to the sun. And so Einstein showed very clearly that space and time are interrelated, as complicated as that may be for some people to intellectualize. The bottom line is that space and time wobble slightly differently, and that modern tropical astrology, Western astrology, is based upon the timing of the reset of that 0 point that I talked about at the very beginning of the show. It's reset every year at the vernal equinox, which moves 1/72nd of a degree away from what the listener who typed in that comment is calling true astrology, which is based upon the stars. The problem with even Vedic astrology is that it's not really based upon the constellations, because the constellation of Aries is 40 degrees wide, and the constellation of Virgo is only 20 degrees wide. And yet, even in Vedic astrology, every sign is 30 degrees. Astrology is a mathematical system that divides a circle into 12. That's basically what it is. And where you start, a circle has no starting point. You have to arbitrarily pick one. And in Vedic tradition, they've picked it based upon what appears to be a fixed star, but that fixed star wobbles away, from the seasons, which is why the Pope Gregory added days to the calendar, because Easter, which was a celebration of Oster, which was the beginning of spring in the pagan tradition, was now being celebrated in winter. Because over 2,000 years or 1,500 years, it had moved back some 20 days, 20 degrees. And so, no, there's this idea that astrology is going to go away because of some religious awakening. It ain't going to happen any more than it's going to go away because some scientist thinks that the world should be mechanistic rather than intelligent.
Okay, so what you've just spoken to also brings up the question of the 13-month calendar. So yeah, 12 or 13, which?
Well, again, modern astrology is a system built upon dividing a cycle in half and thirds and quarters, which makes a 12-fold division. Here's the thing to understand, Sasha. There ain't 12 signs up there. There ain't 13 signs up there on the zodiac. There ain't any signs up there. We made all this shit up because we pattern the external world in ways that work. And so when someone tells me there's got to be a 13th sign, yeah, there is a 13th constellation that crosses the ecliptic, no argument. But astrology, at least in current modern terms, is a system based upon a division by 12. There are closer to 13 moons in one Earth cycle around the sun, unquestionably. That's why our calendar is stupid. Well, most calendars, you can't have one measuring system that keeps the moon and the moon's rhythm around the Earth and the Earth's rhythm around the sun together, because the two wobble out of perspective. So you got to create a leap year. You got to create an extra day added to make the two back in line. You create 12 equal months. It's like Bach ruining music forever on one level because he made the well-tempered scale, which basically took all the nuances out of the magic that existed before to make it mechanical and to make it perfect. So that if you hear a song in E flat and there's another song in A, they're going to sound the same. One's going to be higher or lower, but that's not the way it was until Bach, made everything even. And astrology does that by dividing the circle into 12. And I actually have a deep body of work that is based upon a part of astrology called harmonics, which really acknowledges, and Johannes Kepler was the first guy who wrote about this.
Yeah.
He said that you could throw the zodiac away. It doesn't matter. What matters is the sacred geometry that's created by these planets moving around. And again, now just coming back to this quantum piece, we look at the moon, we look at Saturn, we see them as big lumps of rock up there. But if we look at traveling light, it looks like a particle, like a photon. Yeah. And this is called in physics, the particle wave duality. There's nothing in the subatomic realm that is not both particle and wave. And the planets are the same. When you're not looking at the moon, full moon, when you're not looking at the moon, it's waving at 13 cycles a year. Yes. Saturn is a 3 cycles a century hum. It's too low frequency for us to hear with our ears, but Pluto has 4 beats every millennium. I mean, but the fact of the matter is they are still perceived just like light. When we see the wave of light, at that moment we see it, quantum physics says the quantum wave function collapses and becomes a particle when the observer is looking at it. Yeah. And by the same token, when we look at the moon for a moment, the moon becomes a particle, and it's called the collapse of the quantum wave function. And in fact, all my students call the planets BFPs because they are particles, but they're big fucking particles.
Big particles, yes, exactly. So in real terms, Rick, do you think that that astrology has evolved, or do you think if you went back 5,000 or 6,000 years kind of pre-Sumerian. I don't know what the Genesis point is, but the ancient Vedic or Persian astrologers, do you think they were more on the game than
No,
today?
even you can go back to the Egyptian astrologers. Astrology is culturocentric. It evolves as our consciousness evolves. To the ancients, Saturn was the limit. There was nothing up there that was animated, that moved, that was a slower planet than Saturn's 30-year cycle. That's why Saturn was the gatekeeper to death. Saturn, Satan, same etymological word. When Lucifer came through the gates of Saturn, that's where the three-dimensional world was created, so to speak. And so there is a whole connection between Saturn and three-dimensionality. But we moderners know that Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Eris, and a whole NASA tracks over 500,000 things going around the sun, which is why no astrologer will ever have all the answers to all the questions, because there's no way that we can integrate that amount of information into a simple horoscope or a map of the sky. Again, the word horoscope has the same etymological derivation as telescope or microscope. Greek scope, scopus is to see, to view, and micro is to see the tiny. Tele is to see far. A horoscope, Greek word for hour, is horo, and a horoscope is just a technology to see the hour. Anything else that we put onto it, including the daily horoscopes that I wrote for 20 years, that's all a modern take on this. The fact of the matter is, that it exists out there, whether we are aware of it or not. And the only thing that we get to change, as I know what you spend your life doing, is the only thing that we can change is our awareness. You can't just change the future. You can't just, we have to change our awareness. When our awareness changes, then the past changes. And anyone who says, oh no, the past is written in stone, yeah, that's bullshit. What do you think about the past today versus what you thought about the past before you learned the truth, before you did therapy, before you, the past is always and only created by its appearance in the present moment. And by the same token, astrology is evolving as our awareness evolves, and astrology can be a tool that can then kind of create that. It basically defines the liminal area between our current closed consciousness and what's out there. It gives us a tool to simply widen our perspective. That's it.
Yeah, beautiful.
And anyone who believes that astrology is basically, this is the way you are. No, astrology is only mapping the course of least resistance. It has nothing, shouldn't say it has nothing to do with the way you are, but the course of least resistance is that water will find sea level. And yet we can do a lot with that water on the way down if we know how to practice, if we know what to do. And by the same token, we do a lot of things in our lives that change our awareness, whether it's yoga, meditation, falling in love, intense sexual experiences, psychedelics, entheogenic substance. There's a list, breathing, pranayama, all these things, some sort of focus in athletics, any form of life work. Krishnamurti once asked Joseph Campbell, so Joseph, how do you meditate? And Joseph Campbell said, I dot I's and cross T's. Pick your way of altering consciousness. But when you alter consciousness, astrology doesn't say this is who you are. Astrology really says whoever you are in the course of least resistance, there's 11 other signs out there that you can explore that have other ways of being.
Yeah, beautiful. The hereditary chief, Phil Lane Jr., who I've just spent the last 10 days with at my home in Bali, one of the things he kept saying, and I kind of heard it, he was muttering it at first, and then by the fourth or fifth time I heard him say it in the course of a few days, he was alluding to the conundrum or the challenge of the human is to transcend what he called the looking over the shoulder at the dead past, or looking at the dead past and the imagined future. And we have to move into the still point of now as the perennial witness, and not reflex always into either trying to imagine the future or to look at the dead past, because neither of those are real. What's real is the blisteringly naked, raw state of witness in the here and now, which is the only place where you can engender true dreaming and then
And
manifest.
it's not as simple. And it's not as simple as
Yeah.
be here now. There are some Tibetan traditions that call it like a razor's edge, where there is no remembrance of the past and no anticipation of the future, and it's kind of like sliding down a banister that's a razor. It's not for the meek of the mild of heart.
Yeah. Beautiful. So just speaking a little bit more on the kind of spiritualized aspect of or spiritualizing aspect of your craft, you often distinguish between ascending spirit and grounding soul, and pulling from ancient and philosophical traditions. So how do these energies interplay in astrology, and why is this balance particularly vital now?
Now, because in the Platonic sense, there was a very clear distinction between spirit and soul. Spirit is upward and ascending. Think of Buddhism in the high mountains of Tibet or Colorado. It's moving upward. Spirit is right-handed. It's yang. It's left-brained. Spirit, astrologically and or to the Greeks, were the elements of fire and air. Soul, on the other hand, is left-handed, and of course we know that the Latin word for left hand, is satanic. It's the idea that that right is dexter, and if you have two right hands, you're ambidextrous. But left is negative; it's connected with the feminine. It's sinister is the Latin word, sinistra. And the idea that the left hand, which connects with the right brain, which connects with the elements of water and earth, which are downward, they're inward, and those have been vilified by the ascension idea of Christianity. Quite frankly, even the ascension in modern terminology of like we're going to experience the ascension, that this is something to work for. On one level, it is, but at the same time, we have to remember that ascension without descension, without going inward, without going downward, it doesn't work. That the two together, this is the aberration of 2,000 years, or maybe more like 3,500 years of alphabet-ruled, right-handed, left-brained patriarchal systems. And we're not moving toward a matriarchy. We have to move into a world where the corpus callosum is doing its job of balancing and working with both hemispheres of the brain, rather than thinking the right hand of doing is more important than the left hand of receiving. And so this balance between ascending spirit and descending soul is really where we need to be. It's part of the whole movement against just the mindless run into technology, is because we're afraid of losing what? Our soul, our body, our groundedness to earth, our feet on the ground, the connection with nature, because that is just as important as connecting with the cosmos.
Very good. Beautiful. And leading to arguably the most important question today, as we're beginning to wind up this amazing conversation. Are you able to apply your unbelievable acuity and dexterity to possibly divining the answer to the question of when I might get laid again? Because honestly, it's been quite a while, Rick, and I think I probably need your prognostications roundabout now.
Well, we'll have this conversation offline.
Very good.
But the truth of the matter is, the real question is obviously not when will that happen, but how do I live my life to improve those odds, if that's something that you're working toward. But maybe more importantly, what are the better questions that I could be asking?
Very good.
You said the most important thing, the most important thing that I don't want to lose sight of before we end is that I will be doing a weekend workshop down just north of Santa Barbara on Valentine's Day weekend at a very magical venue, just one exit off the 101 north of Santa Barbara. And anyone can go to Heaven and Earth Workshops, heavenandearthworkshops.com, and click on events, and there'll be a Valentine's Day event. This is for astrologers or totally non-astrologers. The Valentine's Day event in the evening on Friday, Valentine's Day, is going to be about the astrology of love and relationships. And then on Saturday, it's going to be how do you make astrology work in your life if you're not an astrologer. And by the way, the Heaven and Earth Workshops, Evelyn Roberts, who is the proprietor,
Yes.
her from Bali. And I will be back again in November doing another 2-week immersion into astrology in Goa, India, that Evelyn is sponsoring both of these events. But you can find that out at heavenandearthworkshops.com. Other than that, you can find me on the internet anywhere. If you can't, without having specific addresses, you shouldn't be on the internet.
Yeah, no, we're putting all these links in the social media on all of our platforms. Thanks for that. But actually, we got a few minutes. I wanted to raise the specter of in first instance, Dante meet Rick, Rick meet Dante.
Hello, Dante.
He's afraid because we've got a big rainstorm outside, so he's
afraid because of all those spheres around hell.
Right. Elon Musk. Got to ask this question. So here's the Iron Man, and he's such an archetypal figure, a perfect kind of, in a sense, a perfect wingman to the great disruptor Donald Trump. Because again, with Elon Musk, no one can fucking work out, is he the Antichrist or is he a great savior archetype? And there's such interesting kind of geometry and colors to the man. This business of, traveling to and getting humanity to colonize Mars, and apparently billions and billions of dollars in this ridiculous pursuit of that. My view is that it's a psyop and just a cover story for him, gathering lots of, like a PR thing, getting lots of money behind SpaceX. And to me, it's a deep state thing, seeding our, this planet with Skynet, tens of thousands of satellites. It's really, in my mind, ugly stuff, Neuralink, Starlink, all of that. But on the other hand, there are things about the guy I really, really jive with. I'm curious to know what is your take on Elon Musk and the Mars connection in particular.
Well, as you may know, one of my longtime friends is Richard Hoagland, who originally broke the story of the civilizations on Mars, the face on Mars and the NASA cover-up. I don't know if I can answer the Elon Musk question as succinctly as you'd like, but I find him a good example of that patriarchal spirit, without soul. That there's this sense of technology. It's not just about the money that he's been able to put into these pursuits. Not only Starlink, which I know on some levels has helped a lot of people be online that couldn't otherwise, and on the other hand, it's basically layers of space junk that'll never go away, and who knows who can use it for what purposes. I mean, but Neuralink and implanting, there's advantages. People who have never heard before can actually hear, optical implants. This whole thing is a very complicated mixed blessing. And I think that Elon Musk is part of that complicated mixed blessing. There's a part of me that would like to think that he's intelligent enough that these are some sort of deep, kind of operations with consciousness. But I don't believe that, because I think he's just running his energy out as hard and fast as he can, and it's not connected to the Earth. I don't mean that just in this thing of Mars and Starlink, but I mean to his body, to humanity.
Right.
And so, no, I don't know. And I use PayPal, not that he had anything to do with it other than stepping in at the right time and then, and then being kicked out, not that he had anything to do with the invention of the electric car other than, he stepped in at the right time, invested some money, and then got a deal that he was allowed to say that he invented it. He's brilliant at raising money and making money. And I wouldn't necessarily want him on my lifeboat of 10 people if I had to survive.
Very interesting. Who would you have on your lifeboat of 10 people? Narrow it down to 3 or 4.
No, I think you're a survivor. I don't know. The people that I would put on my lifeboat that I've talked about, or life raft, are not necessarily people that anyone else would know. I mean, they're not necessarily famous people. They're people who have, skills and ability to, react in the moment to keep things going. But I do remember a question that you asked me once online about who I would have for dinner. And I don't quite remember what I said, but I remember afterwards I thought, I wouldn't have those people at all. I would have a whole different set. And I can't even remember who those are either. So don't ask me.
Very good. So the role of consciousness, of conscious awareness in 2025, and considering your perspective that astrology acts as a guide through expanding levels of consciousness, what practices or mindsets would empower individuals, in your view, to manifest these astrological energies in 2025? Is there a Rick Levine protocol or discipline?
Well, there's a Rick Levine protocol that is think cosmically, act locally, because it does no good at all to practice astrology or think about ancient history or going to Mars or any of or life in the, in the intergalactic trading universe that we are maybe excluded from. I don't know. All I'm saying is that it does no use at all to push the mind outward unless you act locally, unless you help the person who has an extra bag going out the door and open the door from them, unless you act nicely to, and from the heart to the person who has no value in being able to increase or do anything for you in life, because it's acting locally that will change the larger picture. That as Jung wrote in the last book he wrote before he died, a book called The Undiscovered Self, he said, world peace will never come from politicians signing treaties. It'll come from the resolution of the, what was his words, of the unresolved pressures and tensions and fears within every human mind. And so think cosmically, but act locally. And on top of that, we have to be flexible, because no one, and you can take this personally, no one knows what the fuck is going on, including me, including you, including everyone who may have better perspectives than a lot of other people. And it becomes our job to be bodhisattvas and open the door and push or pull people through so that they have to go on their own journeys. But we don't know. And anyone who thinks they know is dangerous. If you have a teacher who has every answer, get the fuck out of there, right? Because that's a dangerous situation. So my process that I encourage everyone to go through is to question what you think are the unquestionables, to be adaptable and to question so that you learn new information, even if it's not what you want to hear. Not that you have to believe it. I can sit down with someone who I disagree with on everything, but I want to know how they got to their conclusions and what got them there, not so that they can convince me that they are right, but that I can see that there's more than one way of looking at things, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this.
Very good. Well, as for none of us know the answer, speak for yourself.
Except you.
Well, exactly. I'm reformatting as a sex cult. I've decided it's definitely profitable. And I've reached that age, the kind of Osho kind of, Adida, Samraj, Da Free John. I've reached that point. I just had spent a lovely time with Margot Anand last week. You know Margot, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Through you, actually. I met her in Bali through you.
Right. No, because we were regaling each other with memories of all those old sages who, one way or the other, all went off the fucking rails at the end. So proving your point entirely. Rick, this has been a beautiful conversation. Thank you. And I look forward to hooking up with you one way or the other. I really hope this year. And just thank you so very much. It's been a beautiful conversation. Thousands of comments. We can't answer to them, but thank you so much for your time. And
Sasha, it's always great to hang out with you. I appreciate you, the work you're doing. Again, as I said at the beginning, there are some ultimate conclusions we may not agree on. Doesn't bother me at all, because we need people like you doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Rick. I'll give you a call a bit later this afternoon.
Perfect. Adios, my friend.
Bye-bye. Wow, there you have it, folks. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. God, I could keep going for 3 more hours with Rick. Look, guys, I'm going to just throw up a couple of slides here before I sign off and let Christy run the next segment, which incidentally is the restoration of Gaia, regenerating land and spirit, with the remarkable Dan Winter, Professor Ralph Otapol, and incredible human being, Dahlia Ali. Honestly, mind-blowing, this woman. I understand why Professor Ralph and Dan wanted to bring her onto Lazarus. An incredible channel, clear channel. Then we've got the planetary upshift. This is really investigating Schumann resonance and these kinds of major mechanical functions of the cosmos, so to speak, how they relate to you and I, actually to what Rick was talking about, the macro and the micro, and the importance of being fully in your state of witness in the micro in order to be able to grasp the macro, because the two are very much indivisible. They're the same thing when we truly understand our place in the center of creation. Then Ilana Freeland, The Beast of the Land, Transhumanism and Synthetic Futures. And finally, a conversation I recorded a few days ago at my home in Bali with beloved Margot, who keeps reminding us that she's in her 81st year and going so strong. The Tantric Tempest, Sanctifying Sexuality. Friends, this is my tour, the Revelations Tour, USA 2025, Inheriting the New Earth. Christy will probably put some information in to the threads here, links. I'll be at the Conscious Life Expo. My keynote is on the 7th in the evening, 8 o'clock, I think, 8 p.m. till 9:30 or 10 p.m. At the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles. That's next week. And then I'll be involved with a couple of the panels before that ends, I think, on the 11th. And then I'm kicking off my social tour across the US. And that's going to take the best part of 5 months, with a break in between in April, when I'm going to be heading back to Mexico here, then to Africa to tie up the huge New Earth project, which we're doing there, and then Bali, and then back to America to pick up at the Trump Doral with Dr. Charlie Ward for his event. Can't remember when that is. I think it's the end of April or 1st of May, something like that, the first few days of May. And then moving on through May and through June, ending up June 21st at the New Earth land in Tennessee, which we're in the middle of closing on right now, after the last few months of scouting and trying to find the perfect place to sanctify the soil, cleanse it of all the federal liens, the liens and encumbrances of all the war powers. Christy, just put the banner on here, would you? I can't get to the graphics at the same time. This is an important event that we're doing, a very important event. Chief Phil Lane Jr. And other hereditary elders and leaders will be convening with us being New Earth. A number of our core team will be there in Tennessee. Members of the Secretariat of the World Hereditary Council will be there. Members of the Directorate of the International Tribunal for Natural Justice will be there on that day, June 21st. Put it in your diary. I believe it's going to be a historic moment in time, certainly in our lives, where we intend to consecrate soil in Middle America and return it to the indigenous land patterns of the First Nation peoples. In this case, that's the Cherokee. who named it Tanasi, which then evolved into Tennessee. But taking the land and giving it back to them as an act of atonement, emphasis to the Cherokee Nation, which we'll be doing. They'll be receiving the land back as our act of atonement, and then handing it back to New Earth, to the diocese, the church that we've set up. Yes, we've gone religious, friends, in order to make use of the same protections and firewalls that the Vatican complex, the City of London and Washington District of Columbia avails itself through ecclesiastical privilege. So we have reformatted the New Earth Project, the New Earth Movement, the New Earth Initiative as a diocese, as a planetary diocese, for many, many different reasons, not least because we have every intention of educating people of the world that everyone needs to establish their own jurisdiction, their own diocese. So we're doing it at a bigger level for the entire movement. But what we're doing in Tennessee on the 21st of June is to return the living soil to living sons and daughters of God. And that consecration and then proclamation event with the hereditary elders and grandmothers of the Native Americas is going to be a very important event, which sets into motion essentially a cascade of energetically initially, but also connected to esoteric jurisdictions of law and understanding conventions, spells, bonds, treaties, encumbrances, liens, all the fucking nonsense that has been anchored to the soil by these corporations masquerading as governments that are being slain right now by Trump, Kennedy, and the goodly folks who are taking on the Leviathan in Washington right now. Again, love or hate the characters, the individuals, or even some of their political sensibilities, either which way, we're dealing with dragon slayers, disruptors, as Rick pointed out, desperately important at this time that we do disrupt the great sleep that overtook humankind, our civilization, and we're awakening from that. The event on the June 21st in Tennessee is going to be really not just symbolic, but a manifest enactment of piercing the corporate veil, piercing the war powers as an act of peace, not an act of war, as I've been emphasizing since I launched the Tennessee Golden Ticket initiative in order to do the crowdsourcing to raise the money to buy that Tennessee land, which will now be handed back to the natives. They'll be handing it back to us. When I say the natives, I'm talking about the First Nation, Aboriginal peoples, the Redskins, the Native American, Indian, First Nation peoples who had their land and their gold heisted from them in the last 500 years. So sorry to be so nebulous and somewhat esoteric in my narrative there, but for those of you who are paying attention, you'll understand it is complex. It's immensely powerful and important what we're doing. And I will be doing a call to action along my trail of this 5-month tour, steady social tour. Again, it's a social tour. I'm banned from theaters. Every time we try to book a theater, they've taken the booking, and then within a week or two, we've been informed, actually, no, he's not welcome in our theaters. So whatever, make of that what you will. I'd like to invite as many of you as understand the important work that we've been doing with the New Earth Project, with the International Tribunal for Natural Justice. I'd like you to lean in and support and come and see me on the social tour. There's going to be, I don't know how many dates we're doing, probably upward of 30, I would have thought 25, 30, something like that. The schedule will be released next week at the Conscious Life Expo. And again, it's a social tour, okay? It's friendly, it's interactive, it's immersive, it's Q&A, it's a lot of that stuff, but I will be doing a presentation and, in a sense, revealing the greater scope of the New Earth mission. Now I feel bold enough to do that. I feel bold enough to do that because we've made such incredible strides in the last year, particularly, that I think it's time almost to do the big reveal to smaller private audiences on the social tour. In any event, oh no, that was just talk. This was just speaking to the event we did 10 days ago in Bali, the ceremonial event. This here is the seminar at sea: Greece, Egypt, Cyprus, and Turkey. Unfortunately, we had to take Jerusalem off there. That was on the original cruise, but that's been taken off for obvious reasons, because it is still technically a conflict zone, and the ship is not prepared to go there. So Margot Anand has agreed to join me on this cruise, and I'm looking to also inveigle our archaeocosmologist Dave Emery onto it. And it's going to be a 12 days from the 1st to the 12th of October. There you have it. And we're going to have a great deal of fun. I'll speak more about what we're going to be doing on those 12 days. Some of you may remember that was intended for this last year, and then we canceled it and decided to move it to this year, 2025. In any event, that's my update. Thank you for joining me and Rick Levine and producer Christy. I'm sorry about dropping in and out. The rain has now abated, so I dare say signal is now going to be perfect for the rest of the day here in Mexico. Thanks for joining me today, friends. And Christy, over to you. Well, Lazarus. Echoes of ancestors. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let me just be honest for a moment. I got caught with my knickers around my ankles, proverbially speaking, this evening. I was in the middle of a dinner party. One of my staff, my PA, completely forgot to give me the prompts that I had this very important broadcast on today. I just arrived a few days ago here in Bali.